Deep in the rainforests of Haiti, where light barely shines through thick foliage, lie secrets that mankind has barely realized. What is voodoo? It's not just a religion or a set of rituals, it's an otherworldly mystical art that connects the world of the living with the world of the dead. But what if I told you that voodoo shadows can not only predict the future, but also influence people's destinies? In this video, we delve into the mysterious world of voodoo, explore its roots and rituals, and unveil the veil to those who have dared to face its dark forces. Get ready for an exciting journey full of mysticism and surprises. Let's discover the world of voodoo shadows together. A prolonged scream broke the silence of the night. A giant bird was falling from the sky. There was the sound of an impact, as if a sack of potatoes had been dropped, and there was silence. Somewhere in the windows of a high-rise building, the lights came on, people looked out from their balconies. The scream woke up many of the residents of the house. Andre and his faithful Rex were just walking in the yard when they heard the scream. Rex growled and ran to the sound, his master hurried after him. The time had passed midnight, but his dog had eaten too much stolen cheese the night before and had to go out in the middle of the night. The man ran up to the body. "God! Nastya!" the man said as he looked at the woman lying there. With naughty fingers he unlocked his phone and called the ambulance. Rex froze beside him, whimpering pitifully. The girl was still alive and whispering something, only he couldn't make out the words. The last thing he heard was, "Don't let her go." An ambulance and police arrived with a howl, and the girl was taken to the hospital. She died in the early hours of the morning. Strange and sometimes frightening incidents have been happening in number 8 recently. The apartment building, 9 floors, such people call it Candle, was built in Soviet times. Then there was an opportunity to get square meters for free. We lived in a relatively friendly way, observed the duty in the entrance and knew each other by sight. After perestroika, not much changed. It all started with the death of the old poodle of the pensioner from the first floor. Jack walked by himself, everyone knew him in the yard. When the dog did not come home, the old lady went looking for her pet. She couldn't find him. And in the morning, the janitor found a mangled corpse in the janitor's closet. Tamara, the investigator assigned to look into this strange case, stood at the entrance. There was Anastasia, who had fallen from the balcony, and there was the guy over there, dead from blood loss, as if he'd been torn up with his bare hands. Really, too many accidents for one house in such a short time. When the girl's accident had happened, the house had been searched, there had been an apartment survey, the residents had been questioned. She read the protocols and case files, which did not clarify anything. "Which apartment are you going to, dear?" asked Toma, an elderly woman with a stick and heavy bags. "I'm from the police. Tamara Nikolaevna," the investigator introduced herself. "Grannies in any house are a godsend in any case, they always know everything about everyone." Toma means, "You help me carry the bag, my legs hurt, I can hardly walk. We'll talk at the same time." Tamara picked up the heavy grocery bag with one hand and helped the old woman up the stairs with the other. The elevator slowly descended to the first floor, creaking with parts. After a couple minutes, the doors opened, revealing its unsightly gut. The elevator cabin, though old and a little shabby, was clean. Toma didn't like elevators and confined spaces. "We're on 5, the old woman said, and pressed the button with the number 5 on it. The elevator reluctantly went up. Both women didn't say a word until they reached the door of the apartment. Toma carried the package into the kitchen and set it on the table. "Oh, what are you doing? It's dirty!" The old woman was indignant but immediately softened. "Well, you undress and wash your hands, take the blue towel, I'll put the kettle on." Toma obediently went into the bathroom. It was clear at once where such sociability came from. The old woman lived alone. A lonely toothbrush languished in a glass. All the bottles and jars were lined up by height, and the mirror above the sink was perfectly clean. "I wish she hadn't talked herself to death," thought Toma wistfully. In recent years in our house there were new tenants. The old ones died, the heirs sold their apartments. We lived quietly, no quarrels, no scandals. For so many years, no one had ever laid hands on themselves, and they were rarely sick, said the old lady. "Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. Klavdia Antonovna, one of the oldest tenants. You probably know everyone, who lives where and so on," Toma asked cautiously. "Do you want to gossip?" the grandmother asked slyly. "Well, listen. And for the next half an hour Tamara heard so much gossip about the neighbors that it became creepy. And indeed few people pay attention to the grandmothers at the entrance, but they pay attention to everything. Toma learned that the dead Nastya was friends with Sveta from the 8th floor, and she in turn was friends with Yurka and Mishka from the 3rd floor. In fact, there were 2 more in this company, a brother and sister. The company at school age hung around in the courtyard or sat in the entrance. When they got older they gathered at someone's house. Mostly at Nastya's house, since her parents were often away on business trips. No, they drank and did not smoke, behaved decently, but they sometimes talked strangely, about life and death, about God and the devil. Klava only once overheard their conversation, which made her feel uneasy. They were no longer teenagers but young men in their 20s. Not all of them had gone to school after high school, and Yurka had been taken away to the army, but they still met often. Vetta, that is, Violetta, and her brother Maxim went away for a couple of years. They came back this year, settled in their own apartment. Their mother had died the year before, and attached to the portrait of the brother and sister. They didn't show up at the funeral, didn't see their mother off. When they came back, that's when it started. Irishka lives on the 3rd floor. She was barely 30 when she had a stroke. Alexander Viktorovich, a former military man, died in his bed. They found him only a week later. And that's because the smell had spread through the entrance. You know what's the worst part? Suddenly asked the granny. What? Toma asked politely. Everyone who was hurt had been fighting with Maximka the day before. Not really arguing, just making remarks. Igor, the one who'd been stabbed to death in the driveway, had also argued with Max. And Nastya? I don't know. I heard screaming from her apartment last night, then it went quiet. I never realized who she was arguing with. You didn't think it was strange, so many incidents in such a short time. You must have some thoughts about it. There's nothing to think about. She and her sister are sorcerers. They're gonna kill everyone. Stop them, or we'll all die. Why would they do that? I don't know, the old woman said sadly. But they're definitely them. Stepanovna thinks so too. Who's that? My neighbor. Tamara did not stay long in the guest of the talkative old woman and decided to go to Svetlana's house. After walking up to the floor, the investigator pressed the bell. A loud trill sounded in the apartment, once, another, but no one hurried to open the door. Toma automatically pushed the door, and it turned out to be unlocked. Svetlana was found in the bathroom. At the first moment, Toma didn't even realize it was in the bathtub underwater. There really is something bloody going on, muttered the woman, calling the brigade. The girl drowned in her own bathtub, but before that, someone broke her neck. Toma arrived home late. After a quick shower, she collapsed into bed. The ringing of the phone snapped her out of her sleep in the middle of the night. She struggled to wake up and picked up the phone without looking at the number. Toma. It was a long sigh or a sob. The voice was not familiar. Help, Toma! Who is it? Tamara asked cautiously. Help! Help! She came! Babbled a voice in hysterics. Who is it? Tell me or I'll hang up, Toma threatened. Klava, it's me, Klava. Klavdia Antonovna. Toma almost dropped the phone in surprise. Yes, she wrote the phone number herself. What's wrong? She's waiting, the old woman shouted hoarsely, and a frequent ringing sound hit her ear. Tomu was literally swept off the bed. She quickly dressed and jumped out of the apartment. Driving through the night city was a pleasure, no people, no traffic. She quickly got to the house and without waiting for the elevator went up to the right floor. There were no lights in the entrance and the switches didn't work, so the elevator didn't work either. Toma hurried up, skipping over the steps. The door to Klavdia Antonovna's apartment was ajar, and Toma slipped noiselessly inside. There was a strange odor in the apartment, fresh earth, marsh water, and dampness. In the afternoon it smelled of baked goods and glass cleaner. Klavdia Antonovna, called Toma quietly. A muffled groan came from the room. The old woman was lying on the floor with the telephone lying beside her. She was alive, but in a very bad condition. The ambulance came almost instantly. Klavdia was taken away, and Toma remained standing at the entrance. Did something happen to Klava? Asked a woman in her 60s. Tamara looked at her in surprise. It was late, there was no one on the street. Strange, maybe she couldn't sleep. Yes, suspected heart attack, Toma answered in a streamlined manner. I saw you this afternoon. You were at her house. Oh, poor Klava, I told you her tongue wouldn't do her any good. The woman shook her head. Who are you and what are you talking about? Klava told you about Maxim and his sister, didn't she? The woman asked an unexpected question. That's where all the trouble is coming from? Look, she pointed upwards. Looking closely, Toma saw birds, crows circled above the houses, forming a funnel. It was the first time she'd ever seen birds circling at night. The sight was truly eerie. "What's that?" Tama asked quietly. "A dead man's funnel. There's a living dead man somewhere in the house, a cursed one. Now everyone who comes within the funnel's radius will die, and Maxim and his sister are to blame. Do you think the boy is guilty of something? I don't see much criminality in these incidents, just frequency. Only the boy was attacked by someone. Let's go back to my place, don't loiter around." The woman lived under Claudia's apartment and on the same floor with the mysterious Maxim. The woman carefully locked the door and put salt under it. They settled down in the kitchen without turning on the light. The hostess lit a small candle, which was of no use. "What's the boy got to do with it? I'm sick and tired of the secrets of your house, all the innuendo, the whispering. Enough!" Toma said it rather loudly and sharply. The woman's face changed. "Shh. They're all afraid of being next, so they keep quiet, only hinting. Claudia, though she's a gossip, is right about one thing. This couple, brother and sister, are very strange. We don't know where they've been. They arrived skinny and creepy. Violetta used to be beautiful, but now she's an old woman. They hardly ever leave the apartment. I've only seen them at night a couple times. And soon these things started happening. It's scary to be in the house. I'm from the faithful myself, but Maxim and Vetta brought something alien and scary. It's not just a spell or a curse, it's something else. You're telling me fairy tales. Stay here tonight, you'll understand everything," the old lady suggested. Tamara talked to the chief, expressed her version of what was happening in the house number 8. "It seems to me that Maxim has intimidated people. He terrorizes the house, they fear him, they attribute him to witchcraft. Nonsense. I want to spend the night in the house and see what's going on there." "Good. Be careful, and if anything happens, call us right away. Got it?" "Got it." In the afternoon she went to Claudia Antonovna, checked on her and asked permission to stay with her for the night. To Toma's surprise, the old lady looked well. She had had a microinfarction and had been taken to the clinic in time. Of course, she allowed me to stay in her apartment. Having spent the rest of the day running errands, Toma arrived at the house at dusk. Having met a couple of tenants in the entrance, Toma went up to Clava's floor. Everything seemed quiet. She took some food and coffee with her. The apartment was quiet. Toma settled in the kitchen, turned off the overhead light, left the small bulb over the sink. By 11 o'clock the apartment building was awake, stirring like a sleepy beast. Around midnight, relative silence settled in. The light of the street lamps penetrated the apartment, giving just enough light. Toward 1 o'clock in the morning all the street lights suddenly went out, and the small lamp in Claudia's kitchen went out as well. Toma flicked the switches. There was no electricity. She went to the door and listened. It was quiet. Suddenly there was a cautious knock on the door. The knock was ingratiating, quiet. Her heart skipped a beat. Another. She froze at the door, afraid to move and give herself away. "Tamara, open the door, let us go, we're tired." Toma's hair nearly stood on end. "Come on, Tomochka, Mommy," the woman whispered with only her lips. "Toma, don't be silly, open the door," came another, rough, male voice. "Go away!" Tamara suddenly shouted, backing out of the hallway. A hard bang on the door made the woman step back and cower. "This can't be happening! I'm being played!" Toma thought. You bet they were, for the voices belonged to her mother and brother, whom she had personally buried a year ago. It had rained all day that day. Her mother was at the cottage, and her brother had gone to fetch her. On the way back, late in the evening, the man failed to control himself on the wet road. A few days later, Toma buried the people closest to her. And now she hears their voices. What if it was true, and witchcraft existed? She couldn't believe herself that she was considering such a possibility. She used to be a skeptic, but the events of the last few weeks had shaken her faith in materialism. "Thomas, open up at once." Her mother's voice was insistent, like when she was a child and Toma didn't want to do something. "Fuck you!" Toma broke out in an uncultured swear word, simply a swear word. Everything went quiet outside the door, no one else asked to enter the apartment, absolute, almost palpable silence. Suddenly the front door opened with a quiet creak. Toma froze like a hare in the headlights. The door was padlocked. Cold and the unpleasant odor of rotten meat penetrated the crack. The woman wrinkled her nose and regretted once again the evening that she hadn't brought a weapon. The door opened almost wide open and someone spoke in the opening. Toma peered into the outline of a figure, a maiden, a young girl altogether. The girl stood still as if waiting for something. "Who are you? Are you all right? Do you need help?" Tama asked almost curtly. She exhaled. It was just a normal person standing in front of her, not an otherworldly entity, a human she could handle. "Let go," the girl barely audibly mumbled. "I'll try to call for help," the woman said. Out of the corner of her eye, Toma saw the guest cross the threshold. Her movements seemed strange to the woman, as if her body was acting on its own. "Why are you standing in the threshold? Too bad there's no light. I'll turn on the flashlight." With these words, Tamara turned on the flashlight on her phone and shone it on the girl. It took all her professional restraint not to shout. The girl was in either a dress or a nightdress, torn in places and stained red. Her dirty hair hung in icicles, her hands stained with dark stains, her nails chipped at the root. Face shattered, lips dangling in scraps at the chin, blood caked, one cheek torn, many scratches. Eyes sunken, black circles and bruises, a real nightmare. Toma shuddered. That's when she realized what had been confusing her all along: the smell. The girl reeked of dead animal stench. "Go away!" Toma said, backing toward the bedroom door. At that moment, a window in the kitchen opened with a rattle from the draft, and the guest jumped on Toma. Tamara managed to scramble into the bedroom and barricade the door. The creature began to break through the locked door. Then there was a rumble in the kitchen. It rattled the kitchen for quite a while. Then there was silence. And in that silence, Toma heard slurping and quiet rumbling. She felt nauseous. The creature was eating something. There was no connection. She couldn't get texts. She could only call the emergency services. The call lasted about 5 seconds and probably wasn't even picked up. Tamara completely lost track of time. How long she sat on the floor listening to the slurping, she didn't know. Only when it started to get light outside the window, she timidly looked out into the hallway. No one was there but her. The overnight guest had vanished, leaving behind a mess. "Toma! Tamara!" came the voices of her co-workers behind her. Toma stood in the kitchen, surveying the mess. "Hi," she said without turning around. "I think the picture's coming through. But you'll never believe it. I'll start believing in the devil soon enough." The warden dismissed it. "Tell me. No, first things first, then stories. We need to visit an apartment. I'm sure we're not welcome there. And I'm all the more so." The doorbell of Maxim's apartment rang. It was only 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was Saturday, so it took 3 rings and a bang to get them to open the door. As soon as the door was ajar, the police broke into the apartment. 10 minutes later, the dazed guy sat at the kitchen table with his hands cuffed and told the truth. He was also really very surprised to see Toma. Violetta was found in a small room that looked like a closet. She was dead, no heartbeat, except that her fingers were fiddling with the hem of her dress. Maxim and Violetta grew up friendly, supporting and protecting each other. Both of them were fond of history, religions of the world, various cults. They loved to travel, especially they were attracted to non-tourist places. As soon as they started to earn good money, they began to save up for a trip to distant countries. With their mother they had cool relations. She did not understand her children and considered them, to put it mildly, strange. Yes, the brother and sister had a special outlook from childhood. When the opportunity arose, they traveled to the continent of Africa, where they stayed for about 2 months. They met a guy from a local tribe by chance, was it by chance, who invited them to visit him. Everything went well. They even had a chat with the local sorcerer. Vetta asked about voodoo, as she had been interested in that religion for years. The sorcerer got angry for some reason and chased them away. From that moment on, the girl devoted herself to voodoo. She not only wanted to become a disciple of Bokor, that is, the sorcerer, she wanted to become his victim. Her reasoning sometimes made the hairs on Maxim's head stand on end. Meanwhile, Vetta was getting more and more carried away. They traveled all over the continent. Then they left Africa and traveled on. By the way, the question of money was not an issue for them. Both of them by that time worked in the IT sphere, and remotely, and earned well. The last point of their journey was Haiti, the poorest country in the world. It is constantly shaken by military coups, natural disasters, and famine. But Vetta didn't care much. She found Bokor, who promised to perform a voodoo ritual in front of her. Not for nothing, of course, but for a decent sum of money. For some time the preparation was going on, in which the girl took an active part. Her sister didn't take Maxim to the ritual itself, telling him to stay in the hut and keep his head down. They had already lived in a remote village for a week, and he was already tired. Maxim wanted to go to civilization, to a hot shower, fast internet and round-the-clock delivery. But he couldn't leave his sister. He fell asleep under the morning. At dawn, Vetta came running in excited. At first, Max thought she'd taken something. Then he realized she was happy. and also that her sister seemed to have gone crazy on that account. From Vetta's words, Maxim realized that a ritual had been performed, that the poor man had been buried alive in the ground, given a certain potion, and then dug up and, so to speak, uncovered by blowing some powder into his nose. And he opened his eyes. Violetta was jumping with overflowing feelings. Now she wanted to get her hands on those concoctions. "Why do you want it, Vet?" simply asked the dazed boy. "Answer me." Vetta stopped talking and stared at her brother. She started muttering something about some unexplored methods, about the living dead and another form of life. "Do you want to sell it afterward?" Max guessed. They argued, the girl left, and returned only at night. She came back calm and satisfied, and suggested that they make up and go home. So they did. They went back to their native country. That's when they found out that the mother had died. Apparently they couldn't be contacted. Although they wouldn't have flown back anyway. At first everything was fine. One day Maxim gathered old friends and neighbors. Vetta helped him, cooking and setting the table. The evening went on as usual until they started talking about their long journey. An argument broke out and Vetta, in order to prove something to everyone, brought out a bottle of dark glass and drank it in one fell swoop. Maxim remembered the moment for a second and he still shuddered. Vetta twitched strangely, her mouth foamed and she collapsed to the floor. Everyone was confused at first, everyone except Max. He remembered the story about bringing that dead guy from the ritual back to life and rushed to her purse. Yes, the second vial was there too. He did just as his sister had told him, inhaled the powder into her nose. The next minutes were the scariest of Max's life. Violetta was convulsing, her body arched, her heels pounding on the floor. The frightened guests crowded on the balcony and were afraid to approach. No one rushed to help. Vetta suddenly fell silent and the boy was frightened, but no, she opened her eyes. Completely black, without pupils. Her gaze expressed nothing, empty, like that of an infant or a mentally ill person. Maxim realized that he had lost his sister. And then the events went on at breakneck speed. Maxim never understood the effect of the sorcerer's potion. His sister didn't react to anything. She only performed her tasks and was devoted to her brother. And yes, like a little rat, he took revenge on his offenders with his sister's hands. At first, after the death of Nastya, Max was afraid not only of the police but also that his sister could kill him. But he quickly realized that he was her master. He reveled in his power over Vetta.